He looked toward the front row, where Michael sat beside Lisa and Marcus. And sometimes, Jordan continued, the people who once fell hardest are the ones who rise to build bridges the rest of us can walk across. The audience stood in applause. Michael looked down, humbled, not by praise, but by perspective. When he glanced back up, Jordan was smiling at him, eyes saying what words never could. You did the work. Now, keep doing it. And for the first time in his life, Michael didn't see himself as the man in charge. He saw himself as part of something bigger, something right. The storm that once tore him down had become the wind pushing him forward. Before I dive into this incredible and heartbreaking story, please take a moment and subscribe to our channel so we can bring even more powerful stories like these. Detroit mornings have a sound to them. The deep hum of traffic on cracked asphalt. The metallic clank of buses rolling past old brick buildings. The rattle of loose windows in houses that have seen too many winters. Marcus Green heard all of it as he walked up the narrow steps of his grandfather's old home, the cold air biting at his fingers. He was 33, built strong from years under car lifts and grease pits, with shoulders that carried more than engines. Responsibility, grief, bills, family expectations that never really paid him back. Marcus wasn't a loud man. He was a quiet, steady presence, the kind of man people trusted to fix a busted transmission, but never expected to change anything bigger than a tire. But today wasn't about work. Today was about Earl Green, the only man who ever told Marcus he was meant for more than the neighborhood gave him. Inside the small living room, family gathered in circles, folded hands, sad smiles, fake sympathy. A lawyer in a wrinkled gray suit stood by a coffee table, holding a thin envelope stamped Last Will and Testament of Earl Green. Marcus sat down, feeling the weight of the room shift toward him. His Aunt Patrice dabbed her eyes with a tissue, like she'd been grieving for weeks, even though she hadn't visited Earl once in the last 3 years. His Uncle Curtis leaned forward, already calculating what Earl might have left behind. Man worked 40 years at the plant, Curtis murmured. He gotta have something saved. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Earl Green has left behind one item. The room went still. Curtis smirked. Patrice straightened up. And that item, the lawyer continued, is a 1937 Cadillac Fleetwood, currently stored in a barn on his old property outside Romulus. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It is to be transferred to his grandson, Marcus Green. Silence. Then laughter. Real, loud, disrespectful laughter. A car? Curtis paused. Patrice shook her head. That dusty museum piece? Oh, Lord! Ain't even worth the tow fee, someone muttered. Marcus didn't laugh. He stared at the paper, swallowing a lump of something he couldn't name. His granddad had owned that car longer than Marcus had been alive, always kept it locked away, always told folks it wasn't just a car. But still, no money, no savings, no land. Just an 88-year-old Cadillac sitting in a barn with a rusted padlock. When the room emptied out, Marcus stayed behind. He stood in the doorway looking out at Detroit's gray skyline, the city where he'd lost friends, lost sleep, and lost pieces of himself trying to stay afloat. Why this, Grandpa? He whispered. No answer, just the wind pushing at the boarded windows. The barn was 20 miles south, sitting behind a long stretch of empty field. The padlock was rusted stiff, like it hadn't been touched in decades. Marcus had to pry it open with a crowbar. The moment the door creaked, a wave of dust rolled out, warm, thick, almost like the barn exhaled a memory. Sunlight shot through broken slats and long shafts, revealing shapes covered in white sheets. Old lawn equipment, stacks of newspapers, a rocking chair missing a leg. And then, there it was. The Cadillac. Long, black, heavy. A beast of a machine, even under the dust. Chrome hood ornament shaped like wings, stretched toward the future. White wall tires, cracked but still holding air. The rear doors styled like something from an old Hollywood film. Marcus stepped closer. His reflection stared back at him in the faint shine of the grille. He placed his palm on the hood. Cold, solid. Something stirred in him. Pride, maybe. Or connection. Like Earl was still there, standing beside him saying, "This is yours, boy. Take care of her." Marcus popped the trunk out of habit, expecting junk, but it was empty, spotless, like someone had cleaned it before locking there. He slid behind the wheel. The seat springs groaned but didn't collapse. The wood dashboard, still elegant, carved, polished under the dust. He ran a hand over it. "This ain't junk," he murmured. He could almost see Earl in the passenger seat, rocking slow, smiling that tired smile of a man who'd lived more history than he ever got credit for. The tow truck driver laughed when Marcus waved him down. "You sure, man?" he asked. "This thing older than my daddy." Marcus nodded. "Tow it." "Where to?" "My shop." As the chains tightened and the Cadillac lifted onto the flatbed, something inside the car shifted. A faint metallic clink. Marcus noticed. He didn't know yet that this was the first whisper of truth. Back at his garage, people gathered like it was a free show. Neighbors leaned on fences. Kids pointed. Cousins filmed with their phones. Curtis shook his head. "Boy, your granddaddy really played you. Left you a ghetto museum. We should sell it for scrap." Marcus didn't argue. He put on his gloves, grabbed cleaning rags, and got to work. He wiped dust from the hood, revealing more shine than he expected. Scrubbed chrome until it gleamed enough to reflect the streetlights. Pulled weeds from the grill. Swept spiderwebs from the wheel wells. Little by little, the Cadillac woke up. Like its history was stretching after a long sleep. Marcus stepped back, chest rising with pride. He didn't owe anyone an explanation. He wasn't doing it for them. He was doing it for Earl, for legacy, for something bigger than laughter. He grabbed a wrench and tapped the rusted glove box door. It popped open, and thud. A yellowed envelope slid out, landing by his boot. His name on the front. His grandfather's handwriting. A chill ran through him, for when they stopped laughing. Marcus Green learned early in life that Detroit never gave you a day off, not even when you needed one. The morning after he brought the Cadillac home, the whole neighborhood already knew. News spreads fast in places where windows stay cracked open and folks spend more time on porches than in living rooms. By sunrise, 3 kids on bikes were circling the garage like buzzards, pointing at the old car through the half-open door. "Yo, that thing from a museum? Looks like Batman's granddaddy drove it. Bro, it ain't even got Bluetooth." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. Kids didn't know history. They just knew shine. But adults? Adults knew how to cut deeper. His cousin Terrence walked in with a paper cup of gas station coffee, eyebrows raised to the ceiling. "Cuz, this what Grandpa left you? For real?" He whistled low. "Man, I thought you was getting the house or something, but he gave you the Flintstones mobile?" Marcus didn't look up. "Good morning to you too." Terrence sipped loudly. "I'm just saying. He left you a whole antique you gotta fix with prayer." Marcus wiped dust from the rear fender. The chrome caught sunlight, flashing across the garage like a silent rebuttal. Later, his neighbor, Old Man Lenny, who lived 3 houses down, shuffled over in slippers and a bathrobe. "What you drag home this time, Green?" he asked, peering over his glasses. "A project?" "A headache," Lenny corrected. "Ain't no young man supposed to be spending his nights resurrecting dinosaurs. Shoot, I bet that thing drink gas like my wife drinks wine." Marcus smirked. "Good thing I work at a shop, then." "You ain't gonna get rich fixing that relic," Lenny added, wobbling back toward his porch. "Shoulda let the junkyard take it." That night, after the neighborhood quieted and streetlights flickered on, Marcus climbed into the driver's seat with a flashlight and a toolbox. The smell hit him first. Old leather, dust, something faintly metallic. He felt like he'd stepped into a time capsule. He wiped down the dash, revealing polished wood beneath decades of grime. He brushed dirt from the steering wheel emblem, a silver crest shaped like a shield. He vacuumed the carpets until he found floor mats embroidered with initials, E.G. "Grandpa took pride in this," he whispered. He could picture Earl Green, tall, dark-skinned, with hands like weathered bark, sitting behind this wheel in a suit and hat, humming to Motown classics as he drove. People saw junk. Marcus saw legacy. Still, some things didn't make sense. As he worked through the night, he noticed odd little details, ones no casual driver would have ever cared about. Under the back seat, the stitching stopped abruptly. When he pulled it up, the metal panel beneath was welded shut, sloppy but deliberate. "What were you hiding, old man?" Marcus murmured. On the steering column, scratches formed a strange pattern. Not random, aligned, almost like initials carved in anger or fear. He swallowed. His granddad carved his own name into the steering column. Why? He brushed it off. Probably sentimental. Probably nothing. He kept cleaning. Just before midnight, he opened the glove box. At first, nothing. Just dust and the smell of old paper. Then, thump! A yellowed envelope slipped forward and fell into his lap. His heart stuttered. The handwriting on it was unmistakable. Sharp loops, slanted letters, ink fading with time. Marcus, for when they stop laughing. His throat tightened. Grandpa Earl wrote this. For him. For now. He ran his thumb across the seal flap, hesitating. "What did you leave me?" he whispered. He didn't open it. Not yet. Something told him this wasn't a letter you read standing in a cluttered garage with the world asleep around you. Instead, he tucked it into his jacket, locked the Cadillac, and walked inside. Curtis walked circles around the Cadillac, clicking his tongue. "This thing ain't worth nothing but scrap. You should sell it. I know a guy." "I'm keeping it," Marcus interrupted. Curtis raised an eyebrow. "Why? Pride? Nostalgia? Or are you trying to impress people with this museum-mobile?" Marcus stepped between him and the car. "Because it mattered to Grandpa. That's enough." Curtis rolled his eyes. "Suit yourself, but don't expect nobody to take you seriously driving that fossil around." He drove off with a cloud of exhaust and laughter echoing through the street. Marcus waited until he was gone. He walked into the garage, closed the door, pulled the envelope from his jacket, and finally, he opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper, creased and brittle from age. At the top, in Earl's familiar handwriting, were 4 words. "This car ain't innocent." Marcus blinked. He kept reading, each line slower than the last. "This car ain't just. It carried black men who weren't allowed to ride the front of the bus. And one night, it carried something else. Something that cost people their lives." His hand shook. A Polaroid fell out, old, faded, its edges curled. In the picture, Earl stood beside the Cadillac, younger, proud, and behind him, 2 white men in sheriff uniforms stared into the camera, cold, smiling. One of them held a shotgun. The hair on Marcus's arms rose. The letter ended with the line that chilled him. If you ever find the false panel, don't open it alone. Marcus let out a shaky laugh. Man, what were you mixed up in? But deep down, he already knew. This wasn't just an old car. It was a witness, a survivor, a messenger, and now, its secrets belonged to him. Marcus Green sat alone on the cold concrete floor of his garage, the single overhead bulb flickering like it was thinking about going out. The night outside was quiet, except for the occasional rumble of a far-off car or the bark of a restless neighborhood dog. Detroit nights had a rhythm, a tired rhythm, but one Marcus had grown comfortable with. Until now. Now, every sound felt sharper, every shadow felt closer, because the letter in his hands, written in his grandfather's careful, looping handwriting, didn't feel like a message from a dead man. It felt like a warning from someone who'd seen hell and knew it had a way of coming back. Marcus held the paper gently, afraid it might crumble. The edges were yellow, corners curled, ink faded, but the words cut clear as if Earl had written them yesterday. This car ain't just steel, son. It's history. Marcus exhaled through his nose, a slow, shaky breath. His eyes went back to that first line again and again. He could hear his grandfather's voice saying it, that deep, slow Mississippi drawl he'd never quite lost. The voice that always made even the hardest truths sound like lessons. He kept reading. It carried black men who weren't allowed to ride the front of the bus. Marcus paused. His eyes drifted to the Cadillac. There it sat, massive and silent, chrome bumper still gleaming beneath the dust he'd rubbed off. The headlights caught the dim garage light and reflected it back like old eyes watching him closely. He reached out and rested his hand on the front fender, the metal cool under his palm. He had never thought of the car as anything more than a vintage project, a legacy, something sentimental. He never once imagined it had carried the weight of Jim Crow. He read the next line, and one night it carried something else, something that cost people their lives. Marcus's fingers tightened on the paper. What the hell, Grandpa? He wasn't ready for what fell out next. A Polaroid, small and faded, its surface cracked. He picked it up carefully. In the photo, Earl Green stood next to the Cadillac, smiling, half-heartedly as if he wasn't sure whether the moment was worth remembering. He looked much younger, maybe late 20s. Same tall frame, same stern jawline, same steady eyes Marcus saw in the mirror every morning. But Earl wasn't the problem. The problem was behind him. Two white men in sheriff uniforms stood beside the Cadillac, one leaning on the roof, the other gripping a long shotgun like it was just another day at work. Their smiles weren't friendly. Their eyes weren't curious. They looked like men who owned the night, men who had the power to end whatever story they didn't like. Marcus stared at them so long, his vision blurred. Who the hell were you dealing with, Grandpa? He rubbed a hand down his face, the weight of the truth pressing heavier with each breath. His grandfather had never talked about Mississippi, never talked about the 50s, never talked about why he left the South at 25 years old with nothing but a suitcase and a busted watch. Marcus always thought Earl just wanted a better life in Detroit. Now he wondered if Earl had been running. The letter wasn't finished. If you ever find the false panel, don't open it alone. Marcus swallowed hard. He looked back at the welded metal plate under the back seat, the one he had noticed earlier but ignored. The scratches, the initials, the sloppy weld job that didn't match the rest of the car. Suddenly, it all made sense. Suddenly, the car didn't feel like a project anymore. It felt alive, watching him, waiting for him to understand. A memory he didn't know he needed. Marcus leaned back against his tool chest, eyes closed, letting the warmth of the garage light wash over him. Slowly, memories crept into view. Moments he hadn't thought about in. He remembered being 8 years old, sitting on Earl's lap while the old man polished a silver pocket watch. Earl had whispered, "Things in this world ain't always what they look like. Sometimes you carry something heavy, even when folks don't see it." Back then, Marcus thought his grandfather was talking about hard work or disappointment. But now he wondered if Earl had been carrying secrets. Secrets so heavy, they changed the way he walked, the way he looked at people, the way he lived the rest of his life. The laugh he couldn't shake. When Marcus opened his eyes, the Polaroid lay beside him like evidence in a crime scene. He picked up the letter again. "This car ain't innocent." That line stuck. It stuck hard. He thought of Curtis's laughter, the neighbors' smirks, Terrence cracking jokes, people treating the inheritance like trash. But Earl knew exactly what he was leaving behind. Not junk, a testimony, a truth sealed under metal, a truth people once died over. Marcus pressed the letter to his chest, eyes burning. Suddenly, the mockery didn't bother him anymore. Suddenly, the Cadillac didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. He stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stared at the Cadillac with new eyes. "Okay, Grandpa," he murmured. "If this is what you carried, I'll carry it too." He grabbed his welding saw from the tool rack. The metal felt heavier than it usually did, or maybe that was just his nerves. He placed the saw against the welded panel beneath the back seat, but he hesitated. The last line of the letter whispered through his mind like a chill. "Don't open it alone." Marcus lowered the tool. He didn't know why Earl insisted on that. Maybe it was superstition, maybe fear, maybe someone had threatened him decades ago. But Marcus trusted that man more than anyone else he'd ever known. And if Earl said not to open it alone, Marcus wasn't open. Calling the one person who'd believe him. There weren't many people Marcus trusted. Family? No. Neighbors? Hell no. Friends? Maybe one. He scrolled through his contacts and tapped a name. Jay Carter, childhood friend, auto shop co-worker. The only person who ever told Marcus, "Bro, you smarter than you act. Stop pretending otherwise." The phone rang twice. "Yo, Marcus?" Jay sounded half asleep. "What time is it, man? You alive?" Marcus took a breath. "Come to my garage." "Now? Man, it's midnight. Jay, please." A beat of silence. Jay sighed. "Aight, I'm on my way." Marcus hung up and looked back at the Cadillac. The headlights reflected the overhead bulb. It looked like the car was watching him. Like it knew tonight was the beginning of something. Not a restoration, not a project, a revelation. Marcus walked to the garage door and cracked it open, letting the cool Detroit air in. He leaned against the frame, letters still in hand, looking out at the empty street where shadows stretched long across cracked pavement. Inside the garage, the Cadillac sat silent and massive, its history heavy as thunderclouds. And somewhere behind that welded panel, the truth waited. Cold, dangerous, silent. Marcus breathed out slowly. "When they stop laughing, huh, Grandpa?" He folded the letter once, carefully, and tucked it back inside the envelope. Well, they're done laughing. He glanced at the street. "And I'm done running." The sound of a car turning the corner cut through the quiet. Jay was close, and when that garage door closed again, Marcus Green was stepping into history. The moment Marcus opens the welded panel, and what he finds rewrites everything. The night had settled deep over Detroit by the time Jay Carter pulled into the driveway. His old Ford rattled to a stop, headlights cutting across the cracked pavement and lighting up the garage door Marcus had left half open. Jay stepped out, yawning, rubbing his eyes, hoodie half-zipped and hair still crushed on one side from sleep. "Bro," he muttered, shivering in the chilly air. "This better be real life, not one of your midnight breakdowns." Marcus didn't laugh. He stood stiffly beside the Cadillac, the yellowed envelope in his hand. His face lit only by the flickering garage bulb. "Jay," Marcus said quietly, "come look at this." Jay stepped inside, letting the garage door rumble shut behind him. The air smelled like oil, metal, and the tension Marcus carried in his shoulders. Jay followed his friend's eyes to the envelope, then to the Polaroid lying on the workbench. Jay picked it up. "What the hell? That your granddad?" Marcus nodded once. "Who are the other dudes?" Jay asked, squinting at the two white men behind Earl, one with a shotgun, both smiling like they own the world. "According to the letter," Marcus said slowly, "sheriffs, Mississippi, 1950s. Jay whistled low. "That ain't good." "No," Marcus whispered. "It ain't." Marcus handed him the letter. Jay read in silence, eyebrows rising, mouth tightening, breath slowing. When he finished, he set the paper down carefully, like it might explode. "If you ever find the false panel, don't open it alone," Jay repeated. "Damn, he really said that?" "Yeah." "And you want to open it?" "Yeah." Jay took a step back from the Cadillac. "Bro, this sounds like one of them documentaries where two dudes disappear, and Netflix makes a show about it 10 years later." Marcus didn't smile, didn't blink. "Jay," he said quietly, "you're the only one I trust." Jay sighed, slapped his hands against his thighs and muttered, "Man, why I always gotta be the one in the horror movie with you?" But he moved closer, because they'd been friends too long for fear to matter now. The Cadillac's back door creaked as Marcus opened it. Jay held a flashlight, the beam sweeping across the leather seats, the chrome accents, the darkened carpet. Marcus got on his knees, running his fingers along the underside of the back seat where the welded metal plate sat. Rough, uneven, absolutely out of place on a luxury vehicle built in 1937. "Your granddad really hid something in here," Jay whispered. Marcus nodded. "And he welded it himself, I can tell." He grabbed the electric cutter, the blade whining to life. Sparks lit the underside of the seat as he worked the tool slowly across the seam. The room filled with the smell of hot metal, smoke drifting toward the ceiling. Jay stood tense, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. After a few long minutes, the last strip of metal gave way with a sharp crack. Marcus pulled the panel off and set it on the floor. A dark cavity lay beneath the seat, deeper than it should have been, lined with oilcloth. Jay's breath hitched. "Bro, that's not normal." Marcus reached inside, hands steady, but heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. His fingers brushed something wrapped in cloth, rectangular, heavy. He lifted it out slowly. It was a bundle wrapped in thick oilcloth, tied with old twine, stiff from age. Marcus placed it on the workbench. Jay whispered, "You ready?" "No," Marcus answered honestly, "but I'm opening it anyway." He untied the twine, unwrapped the first layer, then the second. A musty smell of old paper and time filled the garage. And finally, the contents lay bare. A stack of black and white photographs, old, yellowed, edges brittle. Marcus picked the top one up. It showed a burned-down house, or what was left of it. Charred wood. A porch collapsed inward. Smoke stains bleeding up the walls. And beside the ruin stood the same two sheriff officers from the Polaroid, smiling. Jay pointed with wide eyes. That's them, from the first picture. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah. He picked up the next photo. This one hit harder. Two bodies hanging from a tree limb, their faces blurred from time and exposure, but their outlines unmistakably human, unmistakably lynching victims. In the background, parked behind the sheriff's car, the Cadillac. Marcus stepped back, suddenly nauseous. Jay swore under his breath. Jesus Christ! Marcus flipped through more photos, each one worse than the last. Burned churches, beaten families, black men stripped and tied to posts. White officers posing casually next to the horror like it was a weekend barbecue. And in nearly every photo, the Cadillac was somewhere in the... Parked on a dirt road, visible through a window, sitting in the corner of a gravel lot, like a silent witness. Marcus whispered, voice cracking. Grandpa was there, but not with them. Jay swallowed hard. He was taking these, bro. He was documenting all this, risking his damn life. Marcus searched the remaining photos until he hit something different. Not a photo. Two metal ID tags, polished by age, engraved with names. Jonathan Price, 1952. David Rowe, 1955. Marcus held them in his palm. The cold metal stung. Jay whispered, missing persons. Marcus nodded. Probably more than that. He opened the last oilcloth fold. A small notebook lay inside. Marcus flipped it open. Page after page of tiny handwriting. Dates, locations, names, descriptions of attacks, names of officers involved. This wasn't a diary. It was evidence, the kind the sheriff's department would have killed to keep buried. And Earl Green had kept it alive. Marcus sat heavily on the garage floor, the weight crushing him. My granddad wasn't running from Mississippi, he whispered. He was escaping. Jay put a hand on his shoulder. Man, he saved people. He documented the truth. Marcus looked at the Cadillac. The gleaming chrome reflected the garage light. But the car didn't look beautiful anymore. It looked haunted, responsible, heavy with ghosts. At the very back of the notebook, Marcus found a single line written in a shakier script, maybe from Earl's older years. If this ever reaches the light, you'll finish what I couldn't. Marcus closed the book. His chest tightened. This wasn't just a restoration project. This wasn't just inheritance. This was a mission, a responsibility, a legacy soaked in blood and truth. Jay exhaled slowly. So what now? Marcus looked up at him. The photographs, the tags, the notebook, the Polaroid. All of it spread like a timeline of violence. Finally, Marcus said, now? He wiped his face and stood tall. We go find someone who can help, someone who'll believe this. Jay nodded once. Miss Clara, Marcus said quietly. She knew my granddad. She knows that history. She'll understand. Jay grabbed his jacket. Then let's go. They turned toward the garage door. Behind them, the Cadillac sat silent, like a giant holding its breath. For decades, it had carried secrets. Now, it was ready to speak. Marcus drove through the quiet Detroit streets with the notebook sitting on the passenger seat, the weight of it somehow heavier than the Cadillac itself. Jay rode beside him, jittery, tapping his knee, checking over his shoulder every few minutes like he expected someone to follow. Neither of them talked for the first 10 minutes. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick, like the air had changed the moment Marcus closed that notebook. You don't find evidence of hate crimes older than your parents and just keep breathing normally. Something inside you shifts. And Marcus felt that, deep. Miss Clara Jenkins lived in an old brick apartment on the east side. She was 86, small, warm-faced, with eyes that could cut straight through a person's soul. Everyone in the neighborhood respected her, not just because she was old, but because she remembered things the world pretended to forget. Marcus parked near her building. Jay took a deep breath. "You sure she's gonna know something?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "My granddad trusted her. That's enough for me." They walked up the stairs. Marcus knocked twice. Footsteps shuffled. Then the door cracked open. Miss Clara peered at them over her glasses. "Well, look at you," she said softly. "Earl's grandson. You got his eyes." Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat. "Miss Clara, I need to talk to you. It's important." She studied his face, his trembling hands, the way he held the old notebook to his chest, then stepped aside. "You boys come on in." Her living room smelled like lavender and old books. Pictures of marches, church gatherings, and family lined the walls. She motioned for them to sit on the couch. "What brings you here?" she asked. Marcus set the notebook gently on the coffee table, like it was sacred. "I found this in my grandfather's car." Miss Clara froze. Her eyes locked on the notebook. Her breath caught. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. "He kept it." Jay leaned forward. "Ma'am, you know what this is?" Miss Clara slowly reached out, her hands shaking as she opened the first page. Her fingers brushed the ink, like she was touching a ghost. "This," she whispered, "is what we spent 50 years looking for." Marcus frowned. "You knew?" She nodded slowly. "Your granddaddy wasn't just a chauffeur. He was an angel with steel in his spine. He drove families out of Mississippi, carried kids in that back seat when the sheriff's men were burning down homes." She flipped to one of the photographs, the one with the burned house. "That right there," she said, "was the Harris place. They blamed it on arson, called the family troublemakers. But I knew better. Everybody black in that town knew better. Sheriff Dalton and his boys did that." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "And my granddad was there?" "He tried to stop him," she said softly. "But one man can't fight a whole system of uniforms and guns." She wiped her eyes, turning to another photo. "He took these pictures risking his life. They'd have killed him on sight if they'd caught him." Jay rubbed his face. "This is insane. Why didn't he tell nobody?" Miss Clara sighed deeply. "He tried, baby. But the newspaper wouldn't publish it. The FBI said there wasn't enough proof. Local cops were in on it. He had nowhere to go, so he gathered as much as he could and ran. Tried again and again to get someone to listen. But the world wasn't ready to hear about white officers killing black families." Marcus lowered his head, his hands balled into fists. "So he just kept it all?" "He waited," she said. "Waited for somebody brave enough to bring it to light." Marcus stared at the notebook. Earl Green had carried this burden alone for decades. He felt something twist in his chest. Anger, pride, grief, all of it mixing together. Jay leaned closer to Miss Clara. "What about these 2 tags?" he asked, pointing at the metal IDs. "Jonathan Price? David Rowe." Miss Clara closed her eyes in pain. Missing boys. They disappeared in 52 and 55. Families never got answers. She opened her eyes. "Marcus, baby, those tags alone could reopen the cases." Marcus exhaled slowly. A sense of purpose, heavy and frightening, settled inside him. "What do I do?" he asked quietly. Miss Clara looked him dead in the eyes. "You expose it." Jay stiffened. "Miss Clara, people are still alive who won't want this out." She nodded. "I know, but truth don't care who's scared." Marcus sat back, absorbing her words. He felt something awaken inside him, something that felt bigger than him, bigger than Detroit, bigger than the Cadillac. Earl hadn't preserved this evidence for no reason. He'd been waiting, and now that weight sat on Marcus's shoulders. As they stood to leave, Miss Clara touched his arm. Your granddaddy wasn't perfect, but he tried to save lives. The least the world can do now is hear the truth. Marcus nodded, voice cracking. I'll make sure they do. They left her apartment quieter than they had entered. Outside, Jay exhaled, long and shaky. Bro, you realize this ain't just old photos. This is a bomb. Marcus tightened his grip on the notebook. Good. Let it blow. But the universe had a way of reacting fast. When they got back to Marcus's house and opened the garage door, Jay stopped. Marcus, he whispered. Where the hell are the photos? Marcus rushed inside. The workbench was empty. The notebook was gone. The metal tags, gone. The oilcloth, gone. The only thing left was an overturned stool and footprints in the concrete dust. Jay whispered, Oh, hell no. Marcus clenched his jaw. Anger washed over him, hot and bright. Someone had broken into his garage. Someone who knew about the evidence. Someone who didn't want it to see daylight. Bro, what we do? Call the cops? Jay asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. Cops tied to this? Hell no, not yet. He checked the Cadillac. The welded panel was still open, but everything inside had been ransacked. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. Marcus turned to Jay. They think they stopped us. Jay frowned. Didn't they? Marcus walked to the corner of the garage, grabbing a box from behind a stack of tires. He opened it. Inside were laminated sheets. Copies. Every photo. Every page of the notebook. Every ID tag. Marcus met Jay's stunned eyes. You really thought Earl Green's grandson was gonna leave evidence sitting out in the open? Marcus said. Come on, man. Jay burst out laughing with relief. My dude, I could kiss you right now. Marcus smirked. Don't. Then his smile faded. We still got work to do. Someone wanted the past buried. Someone who had ties to those old sheriff deputies. Someone who thought they could scare him into backing off. They didn't know Marcus Green. They didn't know the blood he came from. He grabbed the copies, slid them into a lockbox, and snapped it shut. We're taking this to someone who can't be bought, he said. Jay raised a brow. Who? A reporter, Marcus said. One who still cares about the truth. They climbed into the pickup truck. As Marcus started the engine, he stared once more at the Cadillac sitting in the dim glow of the garage light. That car had carried bodies, secrets, and danger. Now it would carry justice. He shifted into drive, and the past finally began to move. Marcus didn't sleep that night. His body was exhausted, but his mind buzzed like an engine running hot. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those photographs. The burned houses, the bodies, the Cadillac lurking in the background like a silent witness to evil. Earl had carried that knowledge alone for decades. Now it lived in Marcus's hands and in his conscience. Detroit was quiet at dawn, the kind of quiet that makes you suspicious. Marcus sat on his porch, elbows on his knees, watching the pale light creep across the street. Jay sat beside him, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. You call her yet? Jay asked. Marcus nodded slowly. She said meet her at the station at 9. Reporter still awake? Pulled an all-nighter, Marcus said. Said the words civil rights cover-up woke her right up. Jay chuckled dryly. Yeah, that'll do it. They both went silent again. A cold breeze slipped between the houses. Jay stared at Marcus with serious eyes. You ready for what comes after this? He asked. Marcus didn't answer for a moment. He thought of Earl, thought of Miss Clara, thought of the people in the photos whose names he didn't know, but whose faces he would never forget. Ready or not, Marcus said, we ain't going back. By 9 o'clock, they were downtown. The newsroom was chaos. Microphones, ringing phones, reporters rushing like ants in a fire. A woman with short twists and a sharp blazer waved them over. "Marcus Green?" she asked. "Yeah." "I'm Alicia Turner," she said. "You said you had something the police department refused to investigate in the 1950s?" "Something they helped cover up," Marcus corrected. She raised a brow. "This I gotta see." They followed her to a small glass room. Cameras were off, lights dim. Alicia closed the door behind them and motioned for Marcus to sit. "All right," she said. "Show me." Marcus placed the binder of copies on the table and slowly opened it. Alicia leaned forward with a skeptical frown, the kind reporters wear when they expect nonsense. But when the first photograph slid into view, her breath caught. "Is that a fire?" "Look again," Marcus whispered. Alicia leaned closer. Her hand shot to her mouth. "Oh my God, those are bodies." Marcus nodded. His voice was steady, low. "Sheriff Dalton's men burned that house. Said the family attacked them first. My granddad was a chauffeur. He saw it happen." He flipped to the next photo, then the next, then the next. With each one, Alicia's spine straightened and her face darkened. "These aren't just pictures," she said. "These are war crimes, domestic terrorism." Marcus slid the metal tag copies across the table. "Two missing boys," he said. "Never solved. Sheriffs." Alicia closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. When she opened them again, they were blazing. "Marcus," she said, "this could shake an entire state." Marcus nodded. "That's the point." She flipped through more pages. "If this is real." "It's real," Marcus said, voice firm. "Then you understand what happens next?" she asked. "You'll be targeted, smeared, threatened. The sheriff's family still has political reach." Marcus didn't blink. "Let them come." Jay crossed his arms. "We'll handle it." Alicia exhaled sharply. "All right, I'm going to put together a full investigative report. But this," she looked him dead in the eyes, "is going to bring cameras to your doorstep." It took only 3 hours. The report aired at 6 p.m., and by 6:01 p.m., the small Mississippi town where the photos were taken erupted. Phones rang in City Hall. The county sheriff's office locked its doors. Descendants of the victims called into the station crying, some angry, some grateful, all shaken. By 6:15 p.m., Twitter was on fire. Hashtag Cadillac evidence, hashtag Dalton cover-up, hashtag Green files, hashtag Justice 1952. By 7 p.m., Marcus's street was full of news vans. Jay peeked through the blinds. "Damn, bro, we famous." "I didn't want famous," Marcus muttered. "I wanted truth." But the reaction wasn't all support. By 8 p.m., someone had doxed him online. Address, workplace, everything. By 8:30 p.m., his phone buzzed nonstop. Unknown numbers, blocked callers, voicemails full of slurs, threats, whispers. "You don't know what you're digging up. You're lying on good lawmen. We know where you live. You ain't safe." Jay slammed his fist on the table. "We gotta call the cops, man." Marcus shook his head. "You heard Miss Clara. The cops down there were part of this. Some of their families still are." Jay paced. "So what? We hide? Move? What?" Marcus stared at the Cadillac parked in the driveway. The same Cadillac that had carried victims, evidence, Earl's burden. "We don't hide," Marcus said. "We drive forward." The next morning, a larger crowd formed outside his house. Reporters, mixed with curious neighbors. A few supporters holding signs that read, "Justice has no expiration date." But standing across the street, a group of angry white men. Red hats, crossed arms, cold stares. One spat on the sidewalk the moment he caught Marcus's eye. Jay whispered, "Trouble." Marcus nodded. Yeah. The men started yelling across the street. Stop lying on good officers. Sheriff Dalton was a hero. You trying to ruin this town's name? This ain't your history to tell. Marcus stepped outside. Jay grabbed his arm. Bro, I got it, Marcus said. Reporters turned their cameras. Microphones pointed toward him. The angry group kept shouting. Marcus stepped forward, voice steady as steel. This ain't about ruining a town's name. This is about truth. Your sheriff murdered families. Kids. My granddad tried to expose it. He risked his life to bring justice. And you tried to bury it, same way you buried those people. He paused, letting the silence settle. If that bothers you more than the murder itself, that says more about you than it does about me. A woman from the crowd yelled, "Why bring up old wounds?" Marcus looked at her calmly. Ma'am, some wounds never healed because you pretended they never existed. A hush fell. Someone behind the jeering group lowered their sign. Jay whispered, "Bro, you just killed him with one sentence." But the fight wasn't over. Later that night, around 10 p.m., Marcus's garage alarm triggered. He rushed outside with Jay behind him. Nothing stolen, but spray-painted across the garage door were the words, "Stop digging." Marcus stared at it, anger simmering deep. "They scared," Jay whispered. "Good," Marcus said. "They should be. Because he wasn't backing down. Not after what Earl sacrificed. Not after what those families suffered. Not after what he'd seen." The next morning, Alicia called. "Marcus, the FBI just contacted us," she said. "They want the originals." Marcus felt his breath catch. Why? They're reopening cold cases connected to Sheriff Dalton. Jay whooped loudly. "Let's go!" But Alicia's tone darkened. "Marcus, the sheriff's grandson is a state senator. He's already calling this a fabricated smear campaign. He's pushing for an injunction to block the investigation." Marcus clenched his jaw. "He ain't stopping nothing." "You're right," she said quietly, "because the victims' families are coming forward. All of them. They're holding a memorial this weekend in Mississippi, and they want you there." Marcus blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you and the Cadillac." Jay's mouth dropped open. "Oh, hell! The legend returns!" Marcus turned to the Cadillac sitting in the morning sun. Polished, solid, heavy with history. A witness, a survivor, a messenger. "We're going," Marcus said, and the journey toward reckoning began. The drive to Mississippi felt like rolling backward through time. Urban streets faded into long stretches of highway, then into two-lane roads lined with fields and leaning fences. The farther south they went, the heavier the air felt, thick with humidity, memory, and ghosts that refused to stay quiet. Jay drove behind Marcus in his truck, while Marcus led the way in the Cadillac. The old 1937 engine hummed with a low, smooth growl, like it remembered these roads, like it had traveled them before, carrying secrets no one dared speak. Every mile made Marcus feel closer to Earl, and closer to the truth Earl had spent a lifetime protecting. They arrived in the small Mississippi town just after noon. The tension hit instantly. People stared, not the curious kind, the guarded, suspicious, "you're not welcome here" kind. Old men in rocking chairs stopped mid-sway. Women on porches paused mid-gossip. Pickup trucks slowed as they passed. Marcus kept his eyes forward, jaw tight, hands steady on the wheel. They pulled up to the old courthouse square where a crowd had gathered. Folding chairs were arranged in a semicircle. TV cameras stood ready. A small stage had been set up with a microphone. At the center of the crowd were the families, the descendants of the victims Earl had photographed. Older men and women with gray hair, younger ones holding signs that read, The truth matters. Justice, even 70 years late. Remember their names. When Marcus stepped out of the Cadillac, conversations stopped. Heads turned. Jay climbed out of his truck and exhaled slowly. "All right," Jay muttered. "This is our." Marcus walked toward the stage. A woman in her 60s stepped out of the crowd. Her eyes were warm but full of pain that had clearly lived inside her for decades. "Are you Earl Green's grandson?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She grabbed his hands. Hers were trembling. "My daddy, Jonathan Price," she whispered. "One of the boys that went missing." Her voice cracked. "Your granddaddy. He tried to tell the world what happened to him, and nobody listened." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'm so sorry it took this long." She squeezed his hands tighter. "Baby, you brought the truth home. That's what matters." Behind them, cameras began recording. A federal agent approached, suit pressed sharp, badge clipped to his belt. "Mr. Green," he said, "we've confirmed the evidence is authentic. Your copies matched the forensic reconstruction of some recovered documents. We're opening a full investigation." Sheriff Dalton's men operated an illegal vigilante group. We're linking them to 4 confirmed murders. Marcus inhaled sharply. Jay whispered, "Holy sh..." But the agent wasn't done. "One more thing," he said. "You should be careful today. Not everyone here wants this truth coming out." Just then, raised voices echoed across the square. A group of angry locals marched forward. Men in camo caps and boots, waving signs. "Dalton was a hero. Stop smearing our history. Go back where you came from." Marcus stood his ground. One of the men in the group, a tall, red-faced man with a sheriff's badge pin on his hat, pointed straight at Marcus. "That car is a damn lie," he shouted. "Sheriff Dalton kept this town safe. You think your granddaddy was some kind of hero? He was a troublemaker, a liar." Jay stepped forward. "Say that again. I dare you." The man spat on the ground. "This whole spectacle is a disgrace. You people always want attention. Let the dead." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked toward the microphone. The crowd quieted. Cameras zoomed in. Marcus looked at the families, the elderly faces, the grieving eyes. Then he looked at the angry men trying to rewrite history. He took a breath. "When I first got that old Cadillac," he began, "I thought it was just a car." His voice carried across the square. But it was more than that. It was a witness. It carried families who were running for their lives. It carried my granddad, a man who risked everything just to tell the truth. He held up a page from the notebook. "My grandfather saw murders committed by people who wore badges but had no honor. He photographed burned houses. He documented innocent men being killed. He hid this evidence because he knew the world wouldn't listen." The air tightened. No one moved. "And now," Marcus continued, "the world is finally listening." Someone from the angry group yelled, "He's..." Marcus turned, gaze steady. "If I'm lying," he said calmly, "why did someone break into my home to steal the evidence? Why did they spray threats on my garage? Why are y'all so scared of the truth coming out?" A hush fell. "You don't fear lies," Marcus said quietly. "You fear justice." A murmur ran through the crowd. Alicia Turner, the reporter, wiped a tear from her cheek. The elderly woman clutching the photo of Jonathan Price rested a hand over her heart. Marcus gripped the microphone tighter. "My granddad wrote something in that notebook. Something I didn't understand at first." He looked down, reading Earl's handwriting. "Truth don't rust," Marcus read aloud. It just waits for someone brave enough to drive it home. A shocked silence followed, then applause. Soft at first, then louder, then a rising wave of clapping, shouting, people standing on their feet. The angry men stood frozen, unsure. Overshadowed by the wall of support, Building A. An FBI agent stepped up to the microphone. "Today," he said, "we officially reopen the Dalton cold cases. We will seek justice for every victim, no matter how old the evidence, no matter how uncomfortable the truth." Cheers erupted. Marcus stepped back from the mic. The elderly woman who'd spoken to him earlier hugged him tight. "Your granddaddy can rest now," she whispered. "You finished his fight." Jay slapped Marcus's back. "Bro, you just dropped a whole earthquake on this town." Marcus looked at the Cadillac behind him, gleaming under the Mississippi sun. Polished, proud, historic. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was testimony. Witness, reckoning. He whispered, "We ain't done yet." Because justice wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of healing. Months passed, but the impact of that day in Mississippi didn't fade. It spread, quietly but powerfully, like ripples from a stone dropped into still water. The Cadillac became more than a relic. It became a symbol people traveled miles just to see. Reporters kept calling, historians kept writing, and the families of victims kept reaching out, thanking Marcus for bringing truth out of the shadows. But Marcus didn't bask in the attention. Fame wasn't what he'd stepped into this for. Justice wasn't a headline to him. It was a responsibility. Most mornings, he still woke early, brewed coffee the way Earl liked it, black, 2 sugars, and sat on the porch, staring at that old 1937 Cadillac, resting in his garage like a sleeping giant. Sunlight gleamed off the polished chrome, reflecting a story that had nearly died with his grandfather. Sometimes Marcus swore he could still smell Earl's cologne when he opened the door, that mix of motor oil, cedar, and old leather. As if Earl was still riding shotgun, whispering guidance through the gears. One cool morning in late fall, Marcus slid behind the wheel and rested his hands on the steering wheel. The same wheel Earl had gripped while ferrying terrified families through dark Mississippi nights. The same wheel that had been witness to terror and to courage. Jay knocked on the passenger window. "You heading out?" Marcus nodded. "Thought I'd take her for a drive." Jay grinned. "Man, that's the most old man thing you've ever said." "Good," Marcus smirked. "I learned from the best." They rolled out through quiet Detroit streets, the Cadillac gliding as smooth as a whisper. Kids on the block stopped to stare. Old men nodded in approval. Some folks lifted phones to record, but Marcus didn't mind anymore. This wasn't attention. This was testimony in motion. As they reached a long stretch of road, framed by yellowing trees, Jay lowered his window. "You ever think about how wild all this is?" he asked. "You started out just trying to fix a car. Turned out you were fixing history." Marcus let out a slow breath. "I think about it every day." Jay nodded. "Your granddad left you more than a car." Marcus tapped the dashboard gently, right where he'd taped the last line of Earl's letter, written in shaky old handwriting. "For when they stop laughing." He traced the words with his thumb. They hit differently now. People weren't laughing anymore. Not at the Cadillac, not at him, not at Earl's legacy. They were listening. And sometimes they were grieving. And sometimes they were angry that the truth had slept in silence for 70 years. But they weren't laughing. "Earl was preparing me," Marcus said quietly. "He knew my whole life people looked at me like I wasn't enough. Not smart enough, not strong enough, not important enough. He paused, and he knew the day would come when the world needed me to. Jay shook his head. Man, your family got superheroes in it. Marcus laughed softly. Just fighters, bro. Fighters who didn't quit. They crossed into the outskirts of the city, approaching a memorial park where the FBI and the families had built a small monument, a black stone plaque engraved with the names of 4 families lost in the Dalton cover-ups. Flowers lined the base, notes, candles, framed pictures, a place of truth and mourning and reckoning. Marcus parked the Cadillac near the entrance. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. He stepped out and walked toward the memorial. Leaves rustled gently under his boots. The sky was soft and golden, the kind of light that makes shadows long but comforting. When he reached the stone, he knelt. Jay stayed back, giving him space. Marcus ran a hand over the engraved names. Jonathan Price, David Rowe, the Harris family, the Jenkins family, and others still being identified. She smiled. Go on now. Drive that truth as far as it can go. Marcus walked back to the Cadillac and slid behind the wheel. Jay climbed in beside him. The sun dipped lower, painting gold across the hood. Marcus started the engine. It rumbled deep, strong, full of history. He pulled out onto the road, the Cadillac gliding forward like it had waited decades to be free again. Buildings passed, trees blurred, the horizon widened. And Marcus thought of Earl, young, brave, determined, gripping this same steering wheel, saving lives because nobody else would. For the first time since Earl died, Marcus didn't feel the weight of his grandfather's legacy. He felt the honor of it. As the Cadillac moved down the long highway, Marcus whispered to no one and everyone, "They mocked me for inheriting an old car, but some inheritances don't shine in gold. They shine in truth."